I'd like to welcome you to Tricord's whole-scale change information webinar. So this is a webinar that's really about informing you about the whole-scale change training that we've got coming up on the 12th to the 14th of June. And it's hosted by one of our clients, Bayer UK, and we're going to have some great fun in that time. What we want to cover in this webinar really is just to introduce the faculty. So it'll be Paul, Alistair, and myself, sharing a bit of our experiences, as well as our experience of utilizing whole-scale change. Tell you a bit about the upcoming event and what's involved in that. We'll share why we think whole-scale change is a key approach, and both for leaders as well as for change practitioners. And also just give you a chance to ask some questions, to chat, but also at the end, we'll have a distinct time where we can just all come off mute and have a bit of a conversation. So with that, I'm just going to probably hand over to Paul just to do a bit of an introduction, who he is and his background and how he came about whole-scale change and all that thinking, and then ask Alice to do the same.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, everybody. I think you can hear me okay. Yeah. So I'm Paul Tolchinsky. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. So right now it's a little after 7 in the morning here. And my background is I was a HR generalist for General Foods back 50 years ago. And my job was actually the HR person for new product development startup. So I would help organize the work around the new machinery. We would make a test run. We would test market the product. If it was successful, we would scale up a whole factory. If it wasn't, we would thank everybody and send them on their way. And it was an incubator for understanding the relationship between people and machines and how you sociotechnically design. The consultant happened to be this guy that you may be familiar with, chuckle, Eric Trist. Right, so Eric was my mentor back in those days, and so I was an organization designer. I've been an organization designer, and and I think I came to whole-scale change because I had a client ask 2 questions. And I'm going to ask the 2 questions, and then we can talk about it later. The first question is, why does change have to take so long? He was being asked to reduce his cycle time, improve his performance, be more efficient, blah, blah, blah. And we were talking about change management. And this question was, why does change take so long? And I thought, it's a really good question. The second question he asked me was, we had a design team redesigning his factory. And he said, why do the few have to decide for the many? Why can't the many decide for themselves? And I thought, well, I don't know. I mean, the way I was raised, you get a small group of people together, you give them all the information, you make them really smart, and they figure it out. And then we go and convince everybody else. So this question of, why can't the many decide for themselves was 2 burning questions that I got asked in the early 1980s, and how I began the journey, the whole scale. That's me.
Thank you, Paul.
So, hi everyone. My name's Alistair Mitchell-Baker. I'm one of the Tricordant team, and I suppose what's brought me to this point is I started in NHS general management. So I spent, I suppose, the first half of my career is working out how on earth can we actually do change in a complex system with many stakeholders with different needs, and how can you make sure that change is actually in the interests of the communities and the population served and the individual citizens and patients, and not just the various stakeholder groups? Because what we often get is a form of stuckness because everybody's got a right of veto and nobody's got the power on their own to make it work. So you've got to democratize the change process, and you've got to find a way of making that happen. And that led me naturally, I guess, over the last 30 years to be involved in and explore various approaches to large group working and change, and then whole-scale change as a specific methodology that I've learned from Paul and colleagues over the years has been a powerful tool that we've used with a number of client situations, and I'm pleased to kind of learn and share together around that. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Alistair. And for me, I think it really goes right back to the beginning of my career, where I really felt that I wanted to make a difference. I felt that not only in my own life did I want meaning, but I also recognize that everyone wants meaning, and they want to have a meaningful impact in the world of work and the thing that they do. And when you think about work, it takes up a huge proportion of our life. And why don't we get given that chance to have that impact? So when I joined Tricordant and was talking about change and learning about change and thinking about all of this, the whole scale change approach and large group intervention as a whole just seemed to resonate really strongly with that fundamental drive of mine around meaning. And so just thinking, well, this gives people a really powerful opportunity to have make a meaningful impact in their organizations, to have voice, to be heard, to create a shared future together. And so when we started exploring and trying these things out and working with a range of large group interventions, the one that really seemed to resonate the most for me was whole scale change. And when we kind of applied it and worked it through, it just seemed to work. I'm just going to kind of pause there and maybe ask Paul to just share a little bit about the whole scale change approach, maybe a few of the highlights, just to give people a bit of an understanding and whet their appetite.
Thanks, Nick. I go back to my my question that my client asked, why does change have to take so long? And so I was on this journey to understand, there's a phrase from Ferrari that is basically the essence of speed is the elimination of friction. You want to go fast, you got to get rid of friction. So you begin to think about what's the friction in change? Well, it's different points of view, it's people being misaligned, it's maybe resistance and reluctance. And so the question was, how do you understand those things and embrace them in a way that enables you to move faster? And so whole scale, to Nick's point, whole scale is one of 5 or 6 large group methods. It is the most robust in the sense that if you look at the history of whole scale change, it has been applied to a myriad of issues and topics, from org design to strategy development to merger integration. And because of the way in which we imagine bringing the whole system together, it's the most robust and probably one of the more structured. I mean, at the other end of the continuum, of course, those of you that know large group methods would be open space, right? So whole scale is more purposeful, more purpose driven. It is slightly more structured in the sense that before people get together, we think about what are the conversations that they need to have when they're together, right? How do we get them to understand and see the different points of view, the different perspectives, not to judge them, but to include them, right, in their thinking. And so in the workshop, and in my work, what we're trying to figure out is how do we bring people together so they see the world each other sees in a way that makes them all smarter, right? And as a consequence of being smarter, they make better decisions together, right? So, so whole scale is probably the most robust of all of the large group methods if you've studied them. Future search and search have very specific applications. SimuReal and some of the others also have very specific applications. Whole scale is a way of imagining approaching any change, right? And any change project. So, I said, if you want to learn more about, the phrase we use is engaging the whole system. Obviously, in large group methods, one way to do that would be to get everybody in the room. The reality in today's world is everybody in the room isn't necessarily going to happen, right? But we might be able to engage the whole system, even if we don't have them all in the room at the moment, right? There are ways to ensure that people's voices are heard, in the journey. And so we talk about designing activities and events, and we talk about how do you pull together a string of activities and events in a way that creates a roadmap that leads to sustainable change, right? You get to the end with 100% commitment and people supporting what they hope to co-create, right? And so you're managing the change while changing, right? If that makes any sense at all. And so what we're trying to do is get you to think differently about what's the journey, how would you engage the critical voices, how do you embrace resistance in a way that informs the choices and the decisions and honors the different points of view, right? And so in the workshop, we talk about all of that and all the complexity that is associated with all the change efforts in the projects that we're working on today.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things in that and one of the complexities that come about is leaders and whether they feel that they can engage that many people or even want to. I wonder, Alistair, if you want to kind of speak to that about some of the resistance maybe felt that leaders feel about engaging a range of people.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously leaders, if we're talking about senior leaders in organizations or across systems, a lot of work I do is in health and social care. So you're often talking about complex systems with many stakeholders, but there are multiple examples of those. So the issue could be an issue about, where does power lie? Who gets to make decisions? Do people understand the broader context in which we're operating? But it can also apply to some of the practicalities about how can we actually get people together in a really busy world to work, and how do you manage some of those dynamics and some of those choices? So a key part of a whole scale change journey or overall process is how do you engage with leadership, sponsorship, how do you get people engaged, what's the role they play in it, as well as how you would design to engage with a wide variety of stakeholders and make sure their people are engaged in the process. So we've used this process a number of times. So most recently, one of the pieces of work we did was with a local authority, a unitary authority, around the issue of healthy weight. How do you create an environment that promotes healthy weight? And it goes right across a number of functions in the council, particularly public health, right across healthcare, the voluntary sector, etc. So creating the conditions where people could come in and bring their perspectives in, and make sure we had lived experience at the heart of it, shaping what was happening, was really important. It was very, very powerful for creating an energy to go forwards, because actually this was the number 2 issue in this council on their list of priorities. Number 1 was sorting out the money. Number 2 was doing something about healthy weight, and whole scale change was a very powerful way into that. And I think, there's so much you will learn about the design of an overall process, as well as workshops that are applicable to almost any kind of change that you want to go through. So I find myself drawing on things from whole scale change, even if I'm not doing a formal whole scale change process. And leadership, sponsorship, and engagement is a key aspect of that always, I think, Nick. Hopefully
Alistair, you also trigger, the term whole scale is whole system. But whole system doesn't necessarily mean everybody all in the room at the same time. It means the whole system, wherever they may physically be. The scale is large and small. And so what the beauty of whole scale is, we all design meetings. We all design conversations that people have at the leadership level and all the way down. And it's a way of thinking about how do you design the deliberations and the conversations to get maybe more critical thinking, and certainly get maybe more critical mass, right, aligned around all that, right?
Absolutely. And there can be some subtle things in how you design processes that create an ownership that you wouldn't expect. So, for instance, we did a piece of work designing how the voluntary sector would engage with an integrated care system in the NHS, just by setting leadership up in a way that it was shared between a community or a charity leader and a statutory organization leader, created a different set of conditions that allow people to participate and own it in a different way. It was frighteningly simple, but also very powerful. So I think that's ways in which system perspectives can get reflected in the way you design it without having all 50,000 people in the room, because you can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, the project I just finished at the end of last year was 7,000 people who had to change their strategy, their structure, and their culture. And they had 12 months to do it and make a presentation to the board about what they wanted to do. And you needed pretty much all 7,000 people aligned in supporting the decisions that are being made. You're not going to get 7,000 people in the room, but you can engage 7,000 people in the conversation in a way that converges, takes all that divergent thinking, right, and creates convergence, which means you go slower to go faster, so you get to the end quicker, right? And you do it, as Nick and I were talking the other day, you do it in a way that is congruent with what you're hoping to accomplish at the end, which is a highly engaged, committed workforce, right? You're changing the culture at the beginning of the project, all throughout the project, as opposed to waiting until the end of the project to say, okay, well, now we want, voila, people should be engaged, right?
Yeah, and I think I want to come back to what Alistair mentioned a little while ago about whole-scale change isn't this thing that you have to follow like a tick boxing exercise. It's an adaptive framework that you can use, and we've certainly done that. And actually, many of the principles that we use in whole-scale change, you could blend into any of the meetings or workshops that you'll be delivering going forward. So one of those may be about convergence and divergence. And this matter of bringing people together in large groups to converge and come to an agreement about what are the key activities that need to happen between now and the next large group intervention, and then diverging into a whole lot of smaller groups that then work on those activities. That may mean that the senior team have to get together and think about how they're showing up, how they're interacting with the wider organization, and whether they're enabling that future culture to emerge, or whether their behaviors and how they show up may not be enabling for that to happen, and a bit of self-reflective work. In other cases, it may be a bit more programmatic with some of the technologies that need to be developed and supported along the way. And so it's a group that comes together, that thinks about today, what are the things that is holding them back, things that they need to think about how they need to change, what are the strengths that they want to take forward, then thinking about the vision and what is this vision of the future that they can agree together, and the first steps that will get us there. And if you think about that, that's really Beckhart's change equation, which is the D, V, F needs to be greater than R. And I know Paul earlier talked about friction. And so you need to have your dissatisfaction, your vision, and your first steps really clear to be greater than your resistance. And that resistance isn't just from the organization, but as I said, can also be from your leaders, may even be from some of your customers. So Paul, I was just wondering if, well, looks like you're going to come in and ask something or say something.
No, go.
So I was going to ask Paul about maybe the trickiest project maybe you've had to deal with, and what were some of those issues, and how did whole-scale change help?
It's a great question. I mean, the trickiest project, they're all challenging, because when they're all challenging. One stands out, which was highly toxic, right? A client of ours had bought this company. People were disenfranchised. They were really underpaid and overworked, truly. And it was a very toxic environment. And the new leaders who came in wanted to change that. And one of them in particular was quite a good leader, but and he decided the only way to make progress was to shut the plant down and bring everybody together in one room, 350, 400 people. And in the middle of this 3-day event, there was a question and answer session with the lead person who was a part of the buying group and this new CEO leader. And the other person was antagonizing people. And you could just see the temperature going up. And I used to say if they had eggs and tomatoes, they would have been throwing at them. I mean, that's how bad it got in that moment. And people were getting up and leaving the room, right? And I walked out into the hallway because my partner was on the stage trying to facilitate this discussion. And there were a whole bunch of people gathered around the supervisor, and I thought, oh my God, they're going to kill him. And so I ran over to quote save him. And as I walked closer to him, one of the workers asked this young man, "Are you going to stick around long enough to make sure this works? Or are you just here to make a name for yourself and flit off like all the others have ever done?" I thought, well, it's a little edgy of a question, but it isn't a bad question. I'm curious how this person's going to answer it. And so the person gave an answer, and they were talking, and I went over to another group, and it was tense, but it was similar. And I looked at them and I said, why are you all out here? And they said, the answer is because, what's happening in the room is what happens every day at work. Right? That's what we need to change. And so, well, this is the moment where you could do that. And when you go back into that room, you have a choice. You can either let those who are angry and toxic take over the place and maybe end up in a bad place all overall, or you have the moment. This is the opportunity to create something different. They walked into the room. The next exercise was actually preferred futuring, right? And in that moment, they created probably the most powerful preferred future I ever saw. And when we asked for volunteers at the end of the day to help take it to the next step, we had like 50% of the people in the room raise their hands, right? 1 hour before that, you would have never thought that 50% of the people would have raised their hands. And so there was that paradigm shifting moment, right? Where, Meg Wheatley used to say the chaos before the order, right? In that chaos comes breakthrough and a paradigm shift. And people were able to take it and run with it and make something amazing happen to it. And the place is still there 17 years later, 18 years later, right?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I see there's a few questions coming in on chat. Maybe we can do some quick fire questions. I'm going to ask Alistair, because you recently worked with AI, how will AI be harnessed to facilitate this? What's your kind of perspectives?
Well, obviously, you can do these events, you can do processes, we can do events, whole-scale change events in person, but often it's a blend over a period of time. And when you do online or virtual work, you clearly can use AI assistance to help summarize things. So we recently did a workshop. It wasn't a whole-scale change, but a workshop with 80 people. And we could turn around the breakout room conversations into here's a presentation that summarizes what you've just discussed on these complex subjects about potential future of your healthcare in your integrated care system in 2035 in 7 minutes. Now, I could have gone quicker if they'd let me use more AI, but they wanted to do a bit more human intervention. So I think you can blend in these tools to augment and support the summarization as long as people own it themselves. So the key thing is we're augmenting and supporting, not taking away from the group owning it. As Paul's story he told is, so it's all about how do we give agency to people in the organization, the system, and ownership. And as long as AI is augmenting and supporting that and people feeling it's a tool for democratizing and not a tool for taking away and manipulating, it'll work. But that's the sort of principle that's going to come in place. Looking at the other questions, we've got a few, Nick.
Yeah, we do. I also recognize some people have had to leave, and I don't know if others will have to leave at 3:30. If you can stay on, that's great, and we'll continue with a bit of a conversation. But there's a question around what things have to be in place for whole-scale change to be successful. Paul, what do you think?
I mean, I think that sort of the minimum critical conditions for success are leaders' willingness to believe that the wisdom is in the system. If you think you got stupid people, right, it's never going to work. Or if you think you're smarter than your people and you have all the answers, it's not likely to work. And so I use the word convincing. I don't really, it's probably too strong, but having leaders be optimistic about, right, the strength and the wisdom of the people that they have, that's minimum critical. Number one, leaders have to lead, but it isn't about giving them the answer. It's about creating and asking the right questions. So that, I think that's number one, Nick. Number two is you have to have some end in mind, right? I mean, it's sort of so what, or why bother, right? The question I ask every leader is, what do you hope would be different in the company and in the world because you did this? And what would be different? And if you don't have some understanding of that, then we have to start there before you would even think about engaging the whole system, right? You need some idea of an end in mind, right? And it shouldn't be in metrics and numbers and dollars and profits and margins and stuff like that, but more, it's more of a word picture of how's it working? How do people work together? How do the customers interact? How do we deal with them? Right? Stuff like that. I think those are probably the two biggest issues.
But I do want to thank everyone for coming along to this webinar. It's been great speaking with you and sharing a bit about our passion for whole-scale change and some of the reasons why we'd love you to come along. If you haven't already signed up, we'd love you to sign up, please. We've got a great group already, and Bayer are going to be bringing in some of their issues for us to work with, so we can get to apply the approach into a live situation and to really get our hands dirty, so to speak. So if you haven't already, please sign up, and thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. I hope to see you.
We'll send out the link to where to sign up following this webinar.
Awesome.
With the answers to all the other questions as well. Thanks very much, everyone. Cheers.
There's the one about the developmental journey for a whole-scale practitioner, right? And I think it's, what we, in Dan Miller Tyson, what we used to say is you have to see one, do one, teach one, right? If you want it to get to mastery, you need to see one, which could be co-facilitating, could be being on the logistics team, a fly on the wall in a project that somebody else is doing, and then you've got to do one usually in collaboration with somebody who maybe has been there before, right? So you team up in some way. And then when you teach it, of course, you always learn more when you teach something, right? And so we always used to say, see one, do one, teach one. That's the answer number one. The answer number two is you have to crawl before you can walk, before you can run, right? And so you apply whole-scale principles to small groups, and you get comfortable with how that works. How would you change your design thinking for a group of 15 or 20 or 30? And then you scale it, right? When you go from 30 to 150, you have to think differently. When you go from 150 to 300, you have to think differently. And so each time you scale, you learn more and you get more. So that's the second answer, is you start small and you work your way up into the bigger, right? Especially if it's about the number of people in the room. The question of how do you engage the whole system even when they're not all in the room, right? In today's world, there's a lot about how can we leverage technologies and virtual space and do town hall meetings and whatever else, right? How do we do road shows in ways that give people voice and things like that? So what are the other ways of engaging the rest of the system that don't necessarily involve having a large group meeting?
The next one was from Hillary, who's asking about on a previous project. She's been asked why you're making this so complicated, and recognizing that's probably a form of resistance, how best to respond.
The biggest hurdle to overcoming complexity is simplicity. And so you know, it's making the question isn't about complicated, it's about complexity, right? You know, you can keep things simple. DVF is a very simple formula, right? I call it simply elegant because it's, you know, when you begin to peel the onion and the drivers, the direction, the actions, etc., it's a simple tool that enables you to embrace complicated and complex situations, right? But the other part of the answer to the question is always, you know, the way I manage resistance is to lean into it, right? And when you say, you know, why are you making this too complicated? Tell me what you mean by that, right? And you know, and if we were to make it more, quote, simple, right? What would that look like in your mind? Because, you know, the reality around resistance is the three of us have always thought, right? If you can lean into it and understand what they mean by it, it's a gift they give you that might make the process better.
I think that's all the questions, unless I've missed any.
Sounds like a good answer.